these right-wing governments find so much in common with each other. So the Indian government has never before done this, but now it's aligning itself between Israel and America. I mean, with Israel and America.
I wonder if that young kid who asked you that question, well, that must have known, right? She knew what was going on. How many people in India knew what was going on? How was this reported? How was that incident reported in India?
Well, you know, it's quite interesting that in India, this government came to power in 1998. And the first thing that it did was the series of nuclear tests. And those had nothing to do with really needing nuclear bombs. But as the newspapers kept reporting, this is an explosion of self-esteem, and it was all about Hindu nationalism. And so at the time, from 1998 up to 2003, the media has completely supported this project of nationalism and Hinduism and so on. And now, when these killings happened, the sort of English media, which is quite upper elite and middle class, got a little uncomfortable and pulled back, you know. But so it was reported. In local papers, it was reported completely distorted, almost as if it was the other way around, that Muslims were killing Hindus. But the problem was not that nobody knew what was going on. You know, the problem was that there was a kind of consensus, which is the dangerous thing in democracy sometimes. You can't just blame it on Saddam Hussein because people are voting for this.
The reason I asked that is I suppose when it happens there in India, as you say, people know about it, but there's this ferocious nationalism which leads them to accept it. And as this girl pointed out to you, well, Bush kills people in other countries. And when you kill people in other countries, it's easier to conceal what is being done. And it seems to me one of the reasons for the acceptance of the war by so many Americans, or not as many Americans as they would like us to think, but the acceptance of the war by a good number of Americans is that the American population has had concealed from it the human consequences of what we've been doing. It's all been presented as a kind of antiseptic operation. And the bombing of Iraq, just like the bombing of Afghanistan before it, like all bombings, really, are presented as something that really doesn't do anything to human beings. And I think of that really through the prism of my own experience, because I was you probably know this, Arundhathi, and my close friends know it because I never let them forget this. But I was in the Air Force, and I was a bombardier in the Air Force. And I did not know what I was doing. I did not know what was happening to people down there. So when I see these pilots coming back from their missions in Iraq, or as they did in Afghanistan, and they're smiling and they're happy and we hit our targets, it reminds me of myself and how flying at 30,000 feet you drop bombs and you don't hear any screams and you don't see any blood. You don't see kids with dismembered limbs, and that's the way modern warfare is carried out. And what happened to me is that I didn't understand the human consequences of what I was doing as a bombardier until I read John Hersey's book, Hiroshima, right after the war. And he went into Hiroshima, and he talked to survivors And you can imagine what those survivors were like. They were people without legs, without arms, people who were blinded, people whose skin was something you could not bear to look at. And he described that. And for the first time, I thought, oh, this is what happens when you bomb.
And President Truman said that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the greatest thing in history.
That's right. And he also said, and that's right, he said also that we have just bombed a military target. And I try to remind people when I'm talking to audiences in the United States that when they hear Rumsfeld and what did you call him? The Prince of Darkness. Yes. When they hear Rumsfeld explain casually, how, well, an accident took place here and an accident took place there. Yes, these people in the bus were killed. These people in the marketplace were killed. But these are accidents because we only bomb military targets. And as you say, Hiroshima was a military target. Dresden was a military target. Tokyo was a military target when 100,000 people were killed in one night of bombing in Tokyo. And the definition of military targets is something, that we must remind people about.
But isn't it interesting how, Saving Private Ryan is so kind of detailed with the blood and the gore and the stumps and the everything. The fiction is so real and reality is so absent. Real wars don't seem to be fought anymore according to TV.
I was particularly annoyed by Saving Private Ryan. And because I've been annoyed often in my life, you see, and especially when World War II is paraded before us again and again and again to glorify war, to take sort of that element of morality that there was truly in World War II, the fight against fascism and so on, but one that's been much exaggerated. But to take World War II and to take the element of morality in World War II and to take the glow that World War II still casts on all of us, except me, and to take that glow and to cast it over all these ugly wars that we have fought since World War II. I resent using World War II, in that way, because, and very often I think, this was the good war, right? In quotation marks. So this is the best of wars. But when you examine it closely, when you examine the consequences of it, it seems to me you must ask yourself, okay, this is the best of wars, and at the end of it, 50 million people are dead. And has war ended? Has fascism ended in the world? Well, we're seeing some of it in this country now. Has militarism ended in the world? And so I'm sorry you brought up Saving Private Ryan, because it always leads to this burst of indignation. But I think we need to think not only about the Iraq War, but about war in general, about war, period, and decide that we have reached that point in human history where we cannot tolerate the mass killing of people for whatever cause is presented to us. So, I know I'm supposed to ask you questions. But I'm wondering about about your patriotism. You know, and I'm wondering about whether you face the same problem that we do in the United States when we criticize the war or criticize the Bush administration, you know, and we